Hello, my friend. Hi there, stranger. Or maybe I should say, howdy, though that word might taste strange on your tongue, because you and I do not live in the time when men spat tobacco into dusty troughs and hitched their horses to sagging rail posts outside clapboard saloons. But tonight, for a little while, I would like you to imagine you blink awake, not in the safety of your own bed, but in a world where the horizon stretches like a painted line, and everything you know, every comfort of glass windows and running water, of buttons and lights has been stripped away. What would it feel like if you woke up as a cowboy in the Wild West? Would you breathe in the dust, cough on it, or let it coat your tongue like a bitter reminder that this world is no dream, no romantic fantasy? Would you look at your hands and see not smooth skin, but the cracked calluses of someone who has pulled rope, drawn reins, and perhaps drawn blood? Close your eyes for a moment, if you wish, and imagine the sounds. Not the hum of electricity, not the whisper of distant cars, but the clop of hooves on hardened earth, the wheeze of a windmill creaking as it drags up water from the deep belly of the ground. Somewhere a coyote calls, thin and sharp against the darkness, and in your chest, perhaps, a flicker of unease, because waking up in the Wild West means waking up in a place where death is not an extraordinary event, but part of the rhythm of every day. Men drink, they fight, they die. Women labor, they bleed, they vanish into silence. Children cough at night, and the cough can mean nothing, or it can mean everything. You have woken in a place where tomorrow is never guaranteed, and even the morning sun feels like a wager against the night. Hello, my friend. You might be thinking, surely the Wild West was adventure. Surely it was freedom. And yes, in some sense it was. Wide skies, land unbroken, the notion that you could ride until your shadow grew longer than your horse. But freedom has a taste, and in that world it tasted of dust and loneliness, of coffee boiled black in dented tin pots, of meat gone stringy over open fires. Freedom meant hunger gnawing at you when the cattle thinned, or thirst cracking your lips when the rivers shrank. It meant sleeping with one eye open because someone might covet what little you owned. It meant riding into a town that looked like salvation and discovering it was built on rot gamblers, drifters, men who smiled with their hands already resting on the handles of their guns. And you, suddenly a cowboy, would be a part of this. Your mornings would begin not with alarm clocks, but with the jolt of cold air on your skin and the ache of a body that had never known softness. The ground is your bed, the saddle, your pillow. If you are lucky, there is coffee, bitter and thin. If you are luckier still, there is bread or jerky. If not, you tighten your belt and ride. Always ride. The cattle move, the herds must be driven, and your life is tied to their hooves, their horns, their simple grazing hunger. Now, before you let your mind gallop ahead into duels and sheriffs and saloons with painted women, I must ask you something. Have you ever truly thought about what it means to live in a place without plumbing, without soap ready at hand, without doctors who know more than leeches and whiskey? Because waking up in the Wild West means waking up in a body that is never fully clean. Dust in your hair, grit in your teeth, sweat that soaks your shirt until the cloth stiffens with salt. Imagine yourself reaching for water, not from a faucet, but from a barrel where insects skitter and the taste is tinged with iron. Imagine brushing your teeth not with mint paste, but perhaps with twigs, or not at all. Imagine the ache of a cavity, the throb that deepens until even the rattle of your horse feels like a hammer inside your skull. There were no quick fixes here, only the long companionship of pain. And yet, there was beauty. Because even in that grim world, there were skies so wide they seemed to fold you into eternity. There were nights when the stars looked close enough to graze with your fingertips. There was the quiet, the endless quiet, broken only by the slow chewing of cattle and the shuffle of the wind. You might find yourself lying on your back, saddle beneath your head, and for a moment the loneliness would melt into wonder. That is the contradiction of the West. Brutality and beauty, hunger and fullness, loneliness and companionship, all woven into one long stretch of horizon. But let us return to you, waking up. Your clothes are not your own. They are stiff denim, rough against your skin, patched and worn. Your boots are heavy, cracked at the seams. There is a hat on your head, wide-brimmed, not as an ornament but as a shield against the pitiless Sunday. The revolver at your hip is not decoration, not a toy. It is the difference between being the one who rides away and the one who lies forgotten in the dust. And though Hollywood has told you that duels are quick, dramatic things, the truth is slower and crueler. Guns misfire, hands shake, shots go wide. And often, death is not in the street at high noon, but in the shadow of an alley, or from behind, or in the silence of a drunken quarrel gone wrong. Hello, my friend. Can you feel the weight of that life pressing in? A cowboy is not a hero. A cowboy is labor, endless, aching labor. Days in the saddle, nights under stars that mock you with their cold brilliance. Your legs rub raw from leather, your back knots into pain. Your eyes squint against the sun until the world becomes a blur of heat and shadow. You live among cattle, thousands of them, each one slow, stubborn, stupid. They kick, they wander, they die. And your pay? Barely enough to keep you alive. You are not the owner. You are not the man who grows rich selling beef to eastern cities. You are the one who drives, who sweats, who bleeds, so that someone else can taste profit. And so, waking as a cowboy is waking into a hierarchy. There is always someone above you. A rancher, a foreman, a man with a ledger and a sharper eye. You, my friend, are the muscle, the dust, the one who can be replaced. And if you fall, if fever takes you, or a horse rolls and crushes your chest, there is no monument. Perhaps a mound of stones. Perhaps a boot left behind. Perhaps nothing at all. But still, you ride. Because what else is there? The West is wide, and the world you knew has vanished. There are no cities of light, no warm showers, no hospitals humming with machines. Only dirt, only sky. Only you, a horse, a gun, and the endless, restless cattle. And yet, listen closely. Do you hear it? Beneath the hardship, beneath the cough of dust and the crack of leather, there is a rhythm. The rhythm of hooves, the rhythm of firewood snapping, the rhythm of a harmonica played softly in the night. It is the rhythm of survival, of men and women clinging to the edge of a new world, building towns from dust and sweat, carving out lives from nothing. It is harsh, yes. It is unforgiving. But it is real. And tonight, you and I will walk through it together. We will feel its hunger, its loneliness, its strange beauty. We will wake up again and again in the Wild West until the dream feels so real you can taste the grit between your teeth. So, hello again, my friend. Are you ready to ride with me? The trail is long, the night is longer, and the story has only just begun. When you wake to your first morning as a cowboy, there is no gentle easing into the day, no soft alarm chiming from a bedside table, no warmth of sheets that smell faintly of detergent and safety. There is instead the raw bite of air in your lungs, a thin cold that creeps through the seams of your blanket and lays its hand across your chest. You hear the world before you see it, the dull shifting of cattle nearby, their low groans like restless giants moving in their sleep, the click of hooves against stone, the occasional cough of another man stirring somewhere in the camp. You lie there for a moment, between the weight of fatigue and the heavier weight of responsibility, and you understand in your bones that here, in this world, morning is not a luxury but a command. The cattle will not wait. The trail will not wait. The day begins whether you are ready or not. You push yourself upright, the ground hard against your palms, the smell of damp earth clinging to your hands. Your body is stiff from the night, each muscle a knot. The blanket slides away, releasing the smell of sweat, horsehide, and smoke into the air. Around you, other men stir in silence. No one wastes words in the early morning. Words are precious, saved for when they matter. A cowboy knows that his voice will be swallowed by the prairie anyway, so why spend it before the sun has risen? The fire is only embers now, a glow hidden under a skin of ash. Someone stirs it with a stick, coaxing reluctant flames to life, feeding them with the scraps of last night's wood. Soon, the thin smell of coffee threads through the cold. It is not coffee as you know it, no delicate roast, no careful balance. It is bitter and black. boiled until it scalds the tongue. But it is warmth, and it is enough. You hold the tin cup in your hands, and the heat bleeds into your skin, steadying you against the chill. You drink slowly, letting the taste anchor you to this life you did not choose but must endure. As the eastern horizon begins to pale, you move toward your horse. He is restless, stamping his hooves in the dirt, breath steaming in the cold. His eyes meet yours, not with affection, but with something closer to recognition. You are bound to each other, not by love, but by necessity. You run your hand along his flank. Feel the coarse hair beneath your fingers, the twitch of muscle at your touch. Saddling him is not a choice, it is ritual, a movement learned in muscle memory. The saddle is heavy, and as you heave it onto his back, the leather groans. The cinch pulls tight, your fingers working stiffly in the dim light. Every morning will begin this way, and every evening will end with the same ritual reversed, until you can no longer tell one day from another. Only the endless cycle of saddle and unsaddle, ride and dismount, work and collapse. The cattle must be driven onward, and so you ride. The herd is restless in the morning, moving like a river across the land, each animal following some invisible current. Dust rises from their hooves, a gray haze that clings to your clothes, coats your face, seeps into your throat, until each breath tastes of earth. You cough, but there is no escaping it. Dust is the constant companion of a cowboy. It fills your lungs, your eyes, your dreams. You ride through it, half blind, half choking, and still you press on. The prairie stretches out in every direction, flat and endless, broken only by distant lines of hills or the occasional crooked tree. The land has no pity, no softness. In the morning light it is stark, almost beautiful, but it is a beauty that does not care whether you survive to see it again. The sky above is vast, an ocean turned upside down, and the sun rises slowly into it, promising heat that will blister your skin and burn the back of your neck before the day is done. You ride into that rising fire, hat pulled low, shoulders already aching from the weight of the saddle and the long road ahead. Hours slip past in a rhythm that is not marked by clocks, but by the sun's climb, by the movement of cattle, by the ache in your body. You circle the herd, calling out with sharp whistles, nudging strays back into line, your eyes always scanning, always watching for signs of panic, of a stampede waiting to explode. The work demands a constant vigilance. A cowboy cannot drift into daydreams. One mistake, one missed signal, and the herd could scatter, hundreds of beasts thundering away in chaos, leaving ruin in their wake. You know this, and so your mind sharpens even as your body dulls with fatigue. The men around you ride in silence, scattered along the edges of the herd. They are figures more than companions, each one alone in his saddle, each one caught in his own rhythm of survival. Now and then, a voice cuts through the dust, a command or a warning. But otherwise, the only conversation is between horse and rider, between man and the land that stretches indifferent beneath him. You think perhaps of the lives these men left behind. Some ran from debts, some from the law, some from memories too heavy to carry. The West has always been a place for running, and yet here, there is nowhere to run. Only the trail ahead, only the horizon that never ends. By midday, the sun is a weight pressing down on you. The dust thickens, turning the air into a haze that blurs the cattle into one shifting mass. Your shirt clings to your back, soaked through with sweat. Flies swarm around the animals, their constant buzzing a low, maddening hum that never ceases. You swat at them, but they always return, relentless as the heat itself. Hunger gnaws at you, but the food you carry is little more than jerky, dry and tough, or bread that crumbles like sawdust in your mouth. You eat quickly, without pleasure, because you must. Food is fuel, not comfort. The day drags on, each moment a repetition of the last, until time itself seems to dissolve into the steady plod of hooves, the endless horizon, the dust that never lifts. Fatigue settles into you like a second skin. Your eyes sting, your muscles burn, and yet you ride, because to stop would be to fail, and failure is not an option here. You are not free, though you are far from cities and laws. You are bound by the herd, by the land, by the very idea of survival. As the sun dips low in the west, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, the herd slows. The men begin to circle them, coaxing them into a tighter cluster for the night. Fires are lit once more, smoke curling into the darkening sky. You dismount, legs stiff, back aching, every movement weighted with exhaustion. The saddle comes off, heavy as stone, and you rub down your horse, his sweat mixing with your own until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. The night settles in with a quiet that is not peace, but tension held at bay. The cattle shift and grunt in the darkness, a restless mass that could erupt at any moment. Someone takes the first watch, riding slowly around the herd, singing low songs to soothe the animals, his voice thin and tired but steady. You sit by the fire, cup of coffee in hand, the bitterness, a familiar anchor. Around you, the men speak in low murmurs, words carried away by the night before they can settle. Stories are rare, laughter rarer still. Most choose silence, staring into the flames, as if the fire holds all the answers they will never find. And you, sitting there, feel the weight of it all pressing into you. The land, the cattle, the endless days. You wonder how long you could endure this life. A week, a month, a year? For some, it becomes a lifetime, each day bleeding into the next until death comes quietly, without fanfare. For others, it is a passage, a chapter in a story that will end elsewhere. But for now, there is no escape. There is only the dust, the saddle, the fire, and the long, long road. When you finally lay down, the ground is hard beneath you, the stars vast above you. The night air chills your skin, the blanket barely enough to hold it back. You close your eyes, and for a moment you wonder if you will ever truly wake, or if this life will stretch on forever. An endless dream of dust and sky. The cattle shift, the wind sighs, and sleep takes you, not gently but with the heavy hand of exhaustion. Tomorrow will come, and it will be the same, and you will rise again, and ride again, and endure again. This is the rhythm of the cowboy. This is the rhythm of survival. When the second morning comes, it feels less like waking and more like being dragged upward through layers of exhaustion you never escaped in the first place. The ground has left its imprint on your bones, and as you roll onto your side, every joint protests. The fire is nothing but smoke now, curling faintly as if reluctant to admit the night is over. One of the men is already on his feet, boots scraping the ground, his face blank with the same mixture of weariness and determination that has settled into all of you. No one says good morning here, because morning itself is not good, it is only inevitable. Your horse waits, tethered just beyond the edge of camp, ears flicking at the faint noises of cattle still restless in the gray light. You move to him slowly, your body sluggish, but necessity has its own kind of whip. He watches you with that animal patience, neither friendly nor hostile, simply present, as though he too has accepted that life is only this, rising, enduring, surviving. You saddle him again, your hands clumsy but certain, leather straps pulled tight, buckles clinking in the half-light. The ritual repeats itself, and in the repetition there is a kind of comfort, though it is the comfort of resignation rather than peace. The trail calls once more. The cattle are nudged into motion, their massive bodies pressing against each other, horns clashing as they shuffle forward. Dust rises again, and with it, the sound of hooves, a steady drumbeat that will follow you until it becomes the very rhythm of your existence. The herd moves like a single beast with 1,000 lungs, its breath heavy in the air, and you are its reluctant shepherd, guiding it across a land that neither welcomes nor resists. A land that simply island. By now, you begin to notice the silence between men. It is not the silence of hostility, nor even of indifference. It is the silence of those who have nothing left to give to words. When survival requires so much of your body, language becomes unnecessary weight. A glance, a gesture, a whistle. These are the tools of communication on the trail. And yet, sometimes at night, when the fire throws its uncertain light across the tired faces of cowboys, you catch fragments of something else. A man will hum a tune from a place he left behind. Another will murmur a story half swallowed by fatigue. The words fall like embers, fragile and glowing, and then vanish into the dark. Loneliness, you realize, is not simply being alone. It is being surrounded by others whose lives are locked away from you, sealed behind walls of silence and dust. You ride beside them, share their hunger, their exhaustion, even their danger, but you do not share their inner worlds. Each man carries his own ghosts, and the West is wide enough to hold them all. Some ran from crimes, some from debts, some from heartbreak that gnawed deeper than any wolf's teeth. None of them will tell you, and you will not tell them, because out here, the past is as useless as luxury. Only the present matters, only the next mile, the next night, the next storm, waiting on the horizon. And storms do come. Out on the open prairie, there is nowhere to hide when the sky decides to break. Clouds roll in, black and heavy, turning day into premature night. The wind whips at your hat, claws at your clothes, rattles the herd into a nervous shuffle. Thunder rolls across the land like the hooves of 1,000 unseen horses, and lightning splits the sky, jagged and merciless. The cattle spook easily, and in a breath, the herd can turn into a stampede, a wall of flesh and horns in blind terror. You ride hard, shouting, whistling, singing anything to calm them, your own fear buried beneath the necessity of control. The storm does not care if you succeed. It tears across the land, soaking you through, chilling you to the bone. By the time it passes, you are drenched, shivering, your hands raw from gripping reins too long. And yet, you ride on, because the herd still moves, and you are bound to it. Nights after storms feel heavier somehow, as though the air itself has absorbed the weight of what might have been. Around the fire, men sit closer than usual, their eyes reflecting the flames, their silence louder than words. You listen to the hiss of damp wood burning, to the occasional crack of a branch, to the soft cough of a man whose lungs will one day give out under the strain of dust and smoke. These sounds become the soundtrack of your life, more constant than music, more enduring than laughter. Danger is never far, though it often arrives not in storms but in silence. There are always shadows on the horizon, bands of raiders, outlaws hungry for cattle, desperate men willing to kill for less than what you carry. The herd is wealth, and wealth draws wolves, whether on 4 legs or 2. You ride with your hand close to your revolver, knowing it may misfire, knowing your aim may fail, but also knowing hesitation is death. Violence here is not a matter of honor, not the clean duels of romantic stories. It is messy, sudden, and final. A man might fall with a grunt, face first into dust, and by dawn his absence will be no more remarkable than the loss of a steer to wolves. Life is cheap in the West, and death is common currency. And yet, despite all this, despite the storms, the loneliness, the ever-present edge of violence, there are moments that catch you off guard. A sunrise that paints the prairie in colors so vivid, it seems impossible that such beauty could exist in a world so cruel. A night when the stars blaze so fiercely above you that you feel, for a fleeting moment, as though you could climb into them and leave the dust behind. The sound of a harmonica drifting through camp, thin and cracked but carrying something of home, something of tenderness in a place that has so little of it. These moments do not erase the hardships, but they thread through them like veins of silver in stone, glimmers of meaning in the grind of survival. The days blur, one into another, each a mirror of the last, until you begin to wonder if time itself has abandoned you. The sun rises, the herd moves, the dust chokes, the fire burns, and then it all begins again. You measure your life not in hours or days, but in the wear of your boots, in the deepening lines on your face, in the slow hollowing of your body. And still, you endure, because endurance is the only choice. The land does not forgive weakness. The herd does not pause for your grief or your pain. The West does not care who you are, only that you keep moving. And as you lie down once more beneath the stars, your blanket pulled tight against the chill, you begin to realize that perhaps this is what it means to be a cowboy. Not glory, not freedom, not the heroics of stories told in brighter times, but this endless repetition, this quiet suffering, this strange companionship with dust and silence. You do not wake each day to live, you wake each day to endure. And in that endurance, perhaps, there is its own kind of meaning, fragile and fleeting though it may be. There comes a point, somewhere between the rising of the sun and its slow collapse into the western horizon, when you begin to lose track of yourself. The body continues, because the body has no choice, but the mind drifts in strange directions, wandering further than the cattle ever could. You feel it in the way thoughts unravel, first into memories, then into illusions, and finally into the blank haze of fatigue. The trail becomes not just a path across the land, but a corridor inside your own skull, endless and echoing, where you cannot tell whether the dust that fills your throat belongs to the earth or to the crumbling edges of your own sanity. Loneliness grows sharper here, not in the absence of people, but in the absence of conversation that matters. Men ride beside you, they whistle, they mutter, they give orders when orders must be given, but the silence between those scraps of sound feels vast enough to drown in. You find yourself longing not for laughter or stories, but for the simple act of someone calling your name with meaning, of someone speaking to you as though you are more than another pair of hands keeping the herd from breaking apart. Without it, you begin to feel like a ghost, moving alongside other ghosts, each of you hollowed by the same dust, the same hunger, the same horizon that stretches further than any dream can reach. And yet, when the herd pauses and the fire is lit, something flickers at the edges of that emptiness. A man may pull a harmonica from his pocket, the notes trembling, imperfect, but carrying a warmth that words cannot. Another may hum beneath his breath, and though he does not sing for you, you catch yourself listening, as if the sound were a rope pulling you back from the edge of some unseen cliff. These are the fragile threads that keep the mind tethered, the small mercies that prevent you from dissolving entirely into the monotony. But they are brief, so brief, and by morning they are gone, leaving only the trail once more. You begin to think about towns differently. When you first imagined the West, perhaps you pictured them as refuges, as bursts of light in a dark sea of wilderness. But as the days lengthen and the nights grind down on you, the image shifts. Towns become mirages, shimmering just ahead of you on the horizon, promising warmth and company and the relief of walls. You ride toward them in your imagination, constructing their shape in detail. The clatter of boots on wooden sidewalks, the clink of glasses behind bar counters, the smell of bread pulled from an oven, the laughter of women leaning against door frames. But when the actual towns appear, dusty and crooked, their streets lined with buildings more skeletal than solid, you understand how much of the picture was your own invention. Reality cannot match longing. The saloons smell not of glamour but of sweat and whiskey spilled across warped floors. The bread is stale, the laughter edged with hunger, the women tired in their eyes long before they are tired in their voices. And yet, even in their hollowness, the towns are necessary. They remind you that the world contains something beyond cattle and sky, even if that something is only another form of survival, another mirror of your own exhaustion. In the towns, you also see what the trail has done to men. Faces cracked from sun, eyes sharp from suspicion, hands that twitch near gun belts, even when no danger threatens. Violence here is not spectacle, it is routine. A quarrel over a card game, a debt unpaid, a glance misinterpreted, these are sparks, and the town is always dry tinder. You witness it once, perhaps, the sudden eruption of gunfire in a street, the crowd scattering, the smell of smoke mingling with blood, and you notice how quickly the town returns to stillness, as though nothing has happened. Death does not echo here. It simply folds into the dust, absorbed and forgotten, while the town resumes its rhythm of survival. And you realize, standing there, that the trail and the town are not so different after all. Both consume men, both erase them, only the pace differs. Back on the trail, the mind begins to warp under the sameness. Days are indistinguishable, like beads strung on an endless cord. You wake, you ride, you eat, you sleep, and each action blurs into the next until you cannot tell whether a memory belongs to yesterday or last month. It is here in this blur that imagination becomes both salvation and torment. You conjure the faces of people you once knew, though they fade with each attempt, slipping from clarity like smoke between your fingers. You imagine futures that will never come, riches that will never be yours, lives you will never live. The West feeds these illusions because it offers nothing solid to hold on to. The horizon is too vast, too empty, and so the mind fills it with whatever it can. But illusions cannot nourish you. They leave you hungrier than before, your spirit aching in a way your body already knows too well. Sometimes, you catch yourself talking to your horse, not out of affection but out of desperation for sound, for response. He flicks his ears, snorts, shifts beneath you, and though he does not answer, you pretend for a moment that he does. You wonder if the other men notice, if they too speak to animals or to themselves in the silence. Perhaps they do, perhaps they don't. Either way, no one mentions it. Out here, madness is not a sickness but a companion, one that everyone learns to ride beside. And in the long silence of night, when the fire has burned down and the stars glare overhead, you feel the weight of it pressing hardest. The sky is vast, yes, beautiful in its cold indifference, but its vastness is also a reminder of how small you are, how easily you could vanish without trace. The coyotes cry, the wind whispers, the cattle shift restlessly, and you lie awake staring upward, caught between awe and terror. You wonder whether anyone, anywhere, will remember your name if you vanish into this dust. Perhaps not. Perhaps you will become like so many others, bones buried shallow, a story swallowed by silence. But still, you rise the next morning. Still, you saddle the horse. You whistle at the cattle. You drink the bitter coffee. Because what else can you do? Survival is not a choice. It is a compulsion. The trail demands it, the herd demands it, the land demands it. And so, you continue. Your mind frayed but unbroken. Your spirit bent but not yet shattered. Perhaps that is the true test of the cowboy, not strength of body, but endurance of spirit. The ability to ride each day into the same horizon and return each night to the same stars, without losing entirely the thread of who you are. Money, in the Wild West, was never only about numbers pressed onto coins or ink scratched across paper. It was weight in your pocket. It was risk coiled tight in your chest. It was the difference between eating tomorrow or riding with hunger gnawing at your ribs. Out here, money was fragile as dust and dangerous as fire, because to possess it marked you, and to lack it condemned you. And as you, the cowboy, move deeper along the trail, you begin to see how every handshake, every smile, every silence is tied in some way to that quiet, relentless currency. Your wages are promised, but promises do not fill your stomach. A foreman might tell you that payment waits at the end of the drive, a neat sum tallied for months of labor. But what good is a sum when the days themselves bleed you dry? You ride on faith, though not in God or in men, but in the thin thread of necessity, because to walk away from the herd is to walk away from survival altogether. So you endure, letting your pay collect like rain in a far-off reservoir, always just beyond your reach, always at the mercy of another man's honesty. And deep down you know, not every reservoir is full when you arrive. Around the campfire, you catch murmurs of wages withheld, of ranchers vanishing when debts come due, of men who drove cattle across half a continent only to find the ledger empty and the doors closed. You see the way the older hands watch the foreman with narrowed eyes, suspicion carved into their faces. Trust, out here, is thinner than the coffee you drink at dawn. A man might smile at you, but that smile is weighed against the value he sees in you, against the risk you pose to his own survival. Even friendship bends under the weight of coin. And yet, when you ride into town, money slips through your fingers faster than water through sand. It burns holes in your pockets, not because you are careless, but because the West conspires to strip you of it. A bed at a boarding house, a plate of food that is barely more nourishing than jerky, a drink to wash down the dust of the trail, the company of a woman who will smile at you for as long as your coins last. All of it is priced high. Because the towns know you are starved not only for food but for relief. And relief, in the Wild West, is always for sale. You step into a saloon, the floorboards warped and sticky beneath your boots, the air thick with smoke and laughter that never quite reaches the eyes. The piano in the corner stumbles through a tune, keys worn and yellowed, while gamblers crowd around tables littered with cards and coins. Here, the economy shifts again. Luck becomes currency, and skill becomes survival. A single card turned, a single roll of dice, can change a man's fortune, and yet the house always waits, patient as a vulture. You watch men win piles of coins only to lose them moments later. The high of victory collapsing into the silence of ruin. You tell yourself you will not play. You will not be the fool who lets hunger masquerade as hope. And yet, the cards beckon, the dice whisper, and the coins in your pocket grow restless, as though they already know they are not long for this world. In these saloons, betrayal is as common as whiskey. A partner may cheat, a dealer may stack the deck, a friend may lean close with a smile, while his hand brushes the coins you left carelessly on the table. You learn quickly that trust is the most expensive commodity of all, and few can afford it. Even among men who ride together, who sleep beneath the same stars and share the same fire, there are moments when suspicion cuts deeper than camaraderie. Who will take the larger share? Who will vanish in the night with the pooled wages? Who will turn his gun not on an enemy, but on a companion, when greed outweighs loyalty? And you, riding in this world, begin to understand that betrayal is not always loud. It does not always come with gunfire or raised voices. Often, it is quiet. A coin missing from your pouch, a promise never kept, a look that lingers too long on your horse or your saddle. It is in the way men avoid your eyes when wages are divided, in the way silence hangs heavier than usual when talk turns to debts. Betrayal, in the West, is simply another form of hunger, another method of survival. And if you are betrayed, the land itself offers no comfort. There is no court to appeal to, no law that will ride out to balance the scales. Justice, like money, must be taken by your own hand, if it can be taken at all. But not every man is faithless, and not every exchange is theft. Sometimes you glimpse something else, a gesture of unexpected generosity, a coin slipped quietly into another's hand, a meal shared without expectation of return. These moments are rare, but they glimmer like lanterns against the dark, reminding you that even here, where survival sharpens men into wolves, the ember of humanity does not vanish entirely. You cling to these moments, because without them, the trail would hollow you into something less than human. Yet the truth remains, money defines you, whether you hold it or not. It marks your place in the unspoken hierarchy, determines whether doors open or close, whether your name is remembered or forgotten. You can ride for months, endure hunger, storms, loneliness, and at the end of it all, your entire existence may be reduced to a handful of coins exchanged for meat, drink, and a bed. The irony is sharp. You risk your life for cattle that will be sold for fortunes you will never touch, and in return, you receive enough to keep you alive just long enough to do it all again. And still, you cling to those coins, because they are proof that you exist, that your labor has weight. You finger them in your pocket, as though they might anchor you, keep you from drifting too far into the endless horizon. You know they can vanish in an instant, lost to a card game, stolen in the night, traded for a bottle that empties too quickly, but while they last, they remind you that you are more than dust, more than silence. You are a man who has earned, however little, and in the West, earning is surviving. The danger, of course, is that money tempts not only strangers, but yourself. It whispers of easier paths, of shortcuts that do not involve dust and cattle. You begin to notice men who leave the herd and turn to other trades, gamblers, rustlers, thieves. Some prosper, for a time. They swagger into towns with pockets heavy and leave with eyes darting, watching every shadow. Their lives burn brighter than yours, but they also burn shorter, extinguished in alleys, in deserts, in shallow graves no one marks. And you wonder, is their hunger any different from yours? Or is it simply the same hunger wearing a different face? At night, lying beneath the stars with your wages still weeks away, you dream of money in shapes it never takes. You dream of a ranch of your own, of cattle that belong to you, of a bed softer than dirt and a roof that holds back the rain. You dream of walking into a town and not counting your coins before ordering a meal, of paying for a drink without wondering what you will lose tomorrow because of it. These dreams are as fragile as the coins themselves, and yet they keep you alive. Because without the hope of more, the little you earn would crush you under its futility. The West is honest, brutally so. It strips away illusions until only the raw truth remains. Survival costs, and the currency is never just coin. It is sweat, it is blood, it is trust spent and often betrayed. And as you ride further, you begin to understand that the real economy of the cowboy is not measured in dollars, but in endurance. How much of yourself you can spend before you are spent entirely. How long you can ride before the hunger in your belly, the weight of betrayal, the emptiness of dreams finally break you. And yet tomorrow, you will rise again. You will saddle the horse, drink the bitter coffee, count the coins not yet earned, and ride into another day. Because that is what a cowboy does. He endures. He spends himself, again and again, and in that spending, he survives. There is a cruelty to the West that does not arrive with guns or storms, but lingers quietly in the body itself. You discover it the first time you wake, with your throat raw, the dust of the trail turned to fire inside your lungs, or when a cut from barbed wire swells and reddens until each heartbeat pounds against it like a drum. Out here, sickness is not an interruption to life, it is life, braided into the rhythm of each day. You learn quickly that a cough can linger for months, hollowing out a man until his voice becomes a rasp. And you learn too that there is no doctor waiting with medicine, no hospital glowing with clean light. There is only whiskey to numb, rags to bind, herbs gathered by hands that half believe in their power, and time, merciless time, that either heals or finishes what sickness began. The cowboy's body is his only tool, his only defense, and yet it betrays him again and again. Hours in the saddle grind at his hips and knees until joints ache like rusted hinges. The sun scorches his skin, carving deep lines that will never fade. Nights on the cold ground stiffen his spine until rising in the morning feels like dragging stone into motion. Every ride leaves new aches layered on old ones, and yet there is no pause, no retreat. Pain becomes not an enemy to be defeated, but a companion to be carried, always there, always whispering. A reminder that the trail claims its due not only in blood but in the slow erosion of flesh. Accidents are as constant as the dust. Horses stumble, saddles slip, ropes tighten around hands until fingers break. A hoof lashes out without warning, striking ribs or skull, leaving a man gasping, blind with agony. And when it happens, there is no soft bed, no surgeon's steady hand. The other cowboys will bind what they can, pour whiskey into the wound and into the man himself, and then leave the rest to fate. Sometimes the body mends, twisted but functional. Sometimes it does not, and the man is left behind, his absence noted only in the lighter rations, the emptier circle around the fire. Even hunger and thirst cut deeper than you might imagine. Days when rations run low, when jerky is nothing but leather that will not soften, when the water in the barrel tastes of rot, the body begins to falter. Your thoughts slow, your hands tremble, your stomach cramps with a hollow ache. But the cattle do not stop for your weakness, and so you ride anyway, body rebelling with each motion, your spirit clinging to the saddle like it clings to breath. You realize then that survival is not triumph, it is endurance. And endurance is always paid for in suffering. There are fevers that creep into camp, invisible until it is too late. A man lies down shivering, his skin slick, his breath ragged, and you all watch, helpless, because what else can be done? Sometimes he rises after days, thinner, paler, but alive. Sometimes he does not. And you dig into the hard earth, laying him down with no priest, no words, only the sound of shovels and the low grumble of cattle beyond. Death is not ceremony here. It is a quiet folding into dust, one more body swallowed by the land. And yet, through it all, there is no time for fear. A cowboy cannot nurse his wounds in luxury. He binds them in silence, spits the blood from his mouth, tightens his belt against the pain in his belly, and rides on. To stop is to fall behind, and to fall behind is to vanish. Even when the body screams, the trail insists. And so you discover a strange truth. Pain itself becomes dull, a constant background hum rather than a sharp cry. It weaves into the rhythm of the ride, into the creak of saddle leather, into the shuffle of hooves, until it feels almost natural, almost necessary. But there are nights, alone under the stars, when the body reveals its true cost. You shift on the hard ground, and every bruise answers, every bone protests, every cut reminds you of its presence. You stare into the dark, and in that stillness you feel the fragility of your own flesh, as though it were glass stretched too thin. You know that a single accident, a single sickness, could shatter you, and that here, in this vast land, the world would continue untroubled. The cattle would graze, the men would ride, the sun would rise, Your absence would be nothing more than another silence among many. What gnaws more deeply than pain itself is the knowledge that there is no safety net. In other lives, perhaps, there is family to care for the sick, doctors to mend the wounded, neighbors to bring food when the body fails. Here, there is only you, your endurance, your stubbornness against the weakness creeping in. You cannot lean on anyone else, not for long, not without becoming a burden. And burdens do not last on the trail. They are left behind, quietly, with muttered apologies that are really only excuses whispered to the indifferent land. And so the cowboy learns to mask his pain, to swallow his coughs, to ride through the fire in his lungs. He learns that showing weakness is as dangerous as weakness itself, because others cannot afford to slow for him. He becomes a master of silence, of endurance, of pretending that the knife twisting in his side is nothing more than a pebble in his boot. The body may falter, but the face must remain steady, the voice calm, the hands sure. It is a performance played for survival, an act repeated until even he believes it. Still, every cowboy carries scars, both visible and hidden, a limp that never fades, a cough that never clears, a hand that no longer closes fully around the reins. These scars are not marks of pride, but of survival, reminders that the land takes from you piece by piece and leaves you diminished but still moving. And sometimes, you see it in the eyes of the older men, the ones whose bodies are nearly spent, who ride more stiffly, whose breaths rattle even when the air is clear. You see the resignation there, the quiet knowledge that one day soon the trail will claim what little is left. They do not speak of it, but you can feel it in their silence, in the way they watch the horizon, with a gaze both weary and endless. It is in these moments, watching them, that you realize something deeper. The body is not just a vessel of suffering, it is also the last tether to meaning. Each ache, each scar, each breath drawn through lungs filled with dust is proof that you are still here, still part of the rhythm of life on the trail. Pain, in its strange way, is affirmation. And so you endure it not only because you must, but because it reminds you that you have not yet been erased, not yet folded into the silence of the land. And so the days continue, each one carving away at the body, each one demanding more than it gives. And you, the cowboy, rise each morning to offer what you have left, knowing it will never be enough to secure comfort, knowing it will only ever be enough to see you through another day. Pain rides with you always, but you learn to treat it as you treat your horse, your coffee, your gun, as something inevitable, something that must be tended, endured, accepted. It is not enemy, not friend, but simply part of you now, as much a companion as the dust that coats your skin or the stars that glare above you. If the trail wears down the body, it erodes the soul even faster, and it is in the spaces between men that you feel this erosion most clearly. You would think that sharing hardship might weld men together, that hunger and dust and danger might forge unbreakable bonds. And sometimes, for a brief hour, it does. There are moments when laughter cracks open across the firelight, sudden and surprising, when a story slips from one man's lips and draws the others closer, as though warmth itself has grown from his words. In those moments, the weariness lightens, the ache eases, and you almost believe in brotherhood. But the trail does not allow illusions to last. As quickly as laughter flares, it dies, smothered by suspicion, by hunger, by the knowledge that every man here is fighting not for camaraderie, but for his own survival. You notice it in the way men measure each other without speaking, glances that cut sharp in the dark. A man who eats a little too much from the pot is watched. A man who lingers too long over a deck of cards is marked. A man who speaks too freely about money is remembered, though not fondly. Out here, where food is thin, where wages are uncertain, where a man's life is worth little more than the cattle he guards, suspicion becomes the only true constant. Even when men ride together, side by side for weeks, their trust is tentative, always balanced on the edge of fear that the same hand extended in friendship may one night pull a knife. And yet, within this fragile balance, something strange blooms. It is not friendship in the way you might know it, not companionship born of choice or affection, but something raw, stitched together out of necessity. When a storm lashes the prairie and the herd threatens to stampede, you see men who will risk their lives to steady the line, not for love of one another, but because each man knows that if one falls, the whole herd may be lost. When sickness grips one of them, the others share their scant rations of coffee, not from kindness, but because one man's collapse may slow them all. It is a bond born not of the heart, but of the brutal arithmetic of survival. And yet, in the fire's glow, when one man leans against another, half asleep, it is hard not to mistake necessity for tenderness. Betrayal, when it comes, slices deeper than the sharpest blade, precisely because it violates that fragile illusion of brotherhood. It may come over a game of cards, when a man who has lost too much accuses another of cheating, and the accusation festers until blood is spilled in the dust. It may come in the night, when a horse is found missing, and with it the man who was supposed to stand watch. Or it may come more subtly, in the way a partner turns his face away when wolves circle the herd, leaving you to fight them alone. Betrayal is not rare in the West. It is as common as dust. But each time it happens, it leaves the survivors quieter, more withdrawn, their eyes harder, their hearts dulled a little further. Still, even betrayal cannot erase the flickers of tenderness that persist against all reason. One night, you might find yourself beside a man whose cough rattles so violently that sleep seems impossible. You fetch him water, though you know it will not help, and you sit with him anyway, your presence a small act of defiance against the indifference of the land. Another time, you hear a voice break into song, low and cracked, and though you do not know the words, you let the melody settle over you, filling a space that silence had hollowed. These gestures are small, but in a world where cruelty reigns, they become monumental. They remind you that even wolves have moments when they lie beside one another, not to bite, but simply to breathe. There is a paradox in this brotherhood. The more brutal the world becomes, the more fiercely men cling to the smallest fragments of connection. A hand offered to lift you into the saddle after a fall, a word spoken to warn you of a hidden ditch, a shared glance that says, without sound, "I see you, and I know your pain." These fragments do not erase the suspicion, but they soften it, make it bearable, allow you to keep riding when otherwise you might collapse. Without them, the loneliness would consume you, devour your mind, as surely as hunger devours your body. But there is also the truth that every man carries his own silence, his own unspoken history, and those silences can never be fully bridged. Around the fire, when the flames flicker low and the stars burn bright, you sometimes feel the weight of those hidden lives pressing against you. You wonder what each man has left behind, what he dreams of when sleep finally takes him, what ghosts ride with him in the saddle. You will never know, not fully. The trail demands that men keep their hearts hidden, their pasts buried. To speak too much is to show weakness, to give away a part of yourself that others may one day use against you. And so silence reigns, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackle of firewood and the occasional mutter of cattle in the distance. In this silence, brotherhood becomes less about words than about presence. It is the comfort of knowing that another man sits awake while you sleep, his shadow circling the herd, his voice humming a tune to keep the cattle calm. It is the reassurance that if wolves appear or raiders come, you will not face them alone. You may not speak, you may not trust fully, you may even suspect betrayal in the corners of your mind, but still, there is solace in knowing that survival binds you together, however tenuously, and sometimes, unexpectedly, tenderness deepens into something more lasting. You see it in pairs of men who ride close, whose silences align, who share their rations without hesitation. You see it in the way one man covers another with his blanket when the night grows too cold, in the way they watch each other's backs, not just because the herd demands it, but because they have chosen to. In such moments, you glimpse the rarest form of wealth in the West, loyalty freely given. It is fragile, always at risk of breaking under the weight of hunger, suspicion, or greed, but when it holds, it shines brighter than gold. And yet, for every bond that strengthens, there are others that fracture. The West is not kind to sentiment. A man you trusted may one day vanish, taking with him the coins you saved or the horse you depended upon. Another may fall in a fight not his own, leaving you to wonder why you let yourself care at all. You learn, painfully, that tenderness carries risk, that to open yourself even a little is to invite loss. And yet, you cannot stop seeking it, because without it, You are nothing more than dust moving across the prairie, hollow and forgotten. In the end, the brotherhood of the trail is not built on permanence, but on fleeting moments, small gestures that flicker like sparks against the dark. A laugh, a song, a shared glance, a hand steadying yours. These are the bonds that sustain you, even if they last only a night, even if they dissolve by morning. They are fragile, yes, but they are also real. And in a world where almost everything is stripped away, reality itself is precious. And so you ride on, carrying suspicion in one hand and tenderness in the other, knowing that both are necessary, knowing that without either, you would not endure. The land does not care if you are alone or together. The cattle will graze regardless. The sun will rise and burn and fall. But in the spaces between men, in the fragile balance of mistrust and loyalty, betrayal and compassion, you find the only semblance of meaning the trail offers. Not comfort, not safety, not love as you once imagined it, but something quieter, something harder to name, a companionship born of survival, fragile as smoke, yet strong enough to keep you moving through the endless dust. Violence in the West was never the sharp, clean duel that stories would later polish and frame. It was a dust that hung in the air, a weight pressing on every man's shoulder, a knowledge that lingered behind each movement of the hand. It was not the exception but the rule, woven into the fabric of daily life like the seams of a worn boot. You carried it with you, even in silence, even in the stillness of dawn when the herd had not yet stirred. It was in the way your fingers brushed against the grip of your revolver without thought, the way your eyes tracked shadows that might only be wind, the way your ears pricked at footsteps behind you in a town that smelled of whiskey and sweat. Violence was not something you prepared for. It was something you expected. You came to see that guns were less weapons than extensions of men's pride. Talismans carried not only for defense, but for the performance of authority. The revolver on your hip spoke before you ever opened your mouth, marking you as someone who could not be taken lightly, or at least someone who would pretend so until the moment was tested. And moments were always tested. In towns where men drank away their loneliness, a single word could tilt into challenge, and a challenge could tilt into gunfire. You could walk into a saloon seeking nothing more than a drink, and within an hour find yourself facing the cold barrel of another man's hunger, his debts, his bitterness. It was not justice that summoned the gun, nor honor, but desperation, envy, and the gnawing emptiness that the trail had carved into him. And yet, the worst of it was not in town but on the trail, where law thinned into nothing and the horizon offered no witness. Raiders, outlaws, hungry men without cattle or coin, they circled the herd like wolves, waiting for the chance to strike. You rode with the knowledge that tonight might bring the thunder of hooves, not from cattle but from horses ridden hard by men who meant to take everything from you. And when that moment came, there was no sheriff to call, no judge to weigh fairness. There was only the sudden blur of gunfire in the dark, the acrid bite of smoke, the terrifying confusion of shouts and screams mixing with the lowing of panicked cattle. You fired blindly, heart-hammering, and in the morning you might find a body or two sprawled in the dust, eyes open to a sky that never answered. There was no glory in it, no certainty. Sometimes you never knew whether your bullets found flesh, whether the men who vanished into the night carried wounds or only fear. The trail swallowed answers the way it swallowed blood, leaving you only with silence. But violence was not always a clash of outlaws and cowboys. Often, it seeped quietly into the spaces between comrades. Men wound tight by hunger, fatigue, suspicion they could snap over the smallest spark. A stolen glance at cards, a muttered insult, a horse borrowed without permission, and suddenly knives were out, fists slammed into faces, blood sprayed into firelight. And when it was over, when one man lay gasping in the dirt, the others did not speak of justice or right. They looked away, muttering that the trail was hard, that tempers were shorter than rations, that nothing more could be done. Death was not shocking here. It was simply another cost. Perhaps the cruelest truth was that violence in the West rarely ended with death alone. Wounds lingered, festering in the absence of medicine, leaving men half-crippled, coughing blood, limping on legs that never healed straight. These men carried their pain like shadows, reminders that survival was never clean. Violence did not carve martyrs. It carved husks, broken men who kept riding because they had no other choice, their bodies echoing with the memory of every blow, every bullet, every fall. And still, violence hung not only in what happened, but in what might happen. It infected your dreams, your glances, your every step into town. You learned to measure distance to the nearest wall, to clock the position of doors, to notice whether a man's hand lingered near his belt when he laughed. You learned to hear danger in the pitch of voices, to see it in the tremor of eyes that could not quite hold your gaze. You lived always at the edge of readiness, and readiness itself wore you down, grinding your spirit until you no longer knew what it meant to relax. Even in the quiet moments by the fire, when stars burned cold above and the herd shifted softly in the dark, you never unclenched fully, never laid your weapon more than an arm's reach away. Violence could arrive in the middle of a laugh, and you would be a fool not to expect it. What makes the West unforgettable is not the scale of its violence, but its indifference. The land did not care whether a man fell to a bullet, a blade, or a boot. The wind would sweep the dust across his blood. The cattle would graze as though nothing had happened. The sun would rise again without pity. There was no echo of tragedy here, no pause for mourning. A life was extinguished and folded back into silence, and the world continued. It was this indifference, more than the violence itself, that hollowed men. To know that your suffering meant nothing, that your death would leave no mark but the shallow scrape of a boot heel, was to carry despair heavier than any saddle. And yet, in this bleakness, men still sought meaning in violence, because without it, they were nothing more than animals herding animals. They told themselves that pulling the trigger was justice, that striking first was survival, that blood spilled was proof of their own strength. They shaped stories around their actions, polishing them until they gleamed like truth, because stories were all they had to keep despair from swallowing them whole. You would hear a man recount a fight he barely survived, his voice swelling with pride, the details sharpened until they rang with false heroism. And you knew, watching him, that his story was less about what happened and more about what he needed to believe that his violence was not waste, that his scars were not meaningless. You too begin to carry such stories, even if only in the silence of your own mind. You replay the night when you fired into the dark, when you felt the recoil jolt your arm, when the smoke bit your eyes, and you tell yourself that you saved the herd, that you saved the men, that your bullet meant something. You do not admit, not even to yourself, that you do not know whether it hit anything at all. You cling to the story, because the alternative that it was all chaos, all meaningless, would strip away what little hope you have left. Violence, then, becomes not only survival but identity. A cowboy who has never drawn blood is a cowboy untested, his presence questioned, his worth diminished. To endure here is to accept that one day your hands will be stained, whether you choose it or not. And when that day comes, you change. The first time is a tearing open of the world, a shudder that ripples through you. The second time is easier. The third, easier still. And before long, you carry it without thought, as though it were no more remarkable than dust on your boots. That is how the West remakes you. Not through hunger, not through storms, but through the quiet normalization of violence, until it seeps into your marrow and feels like nothing at all. But deep inside, in the places you rarely let yourself touch, the weight remains. When you lie awake at night, staring into the stars, you feel it pressing against you, the knowledge of what you have done, of what has been done around you. You wonder if the silence of the prairie is not only the absence of sound, but the accumulation of every cry swallowed by the wind, every plea unheard, every shot fired and forgotten. You wonder if the land itself remembers, even if the men do not. And in that wondering, you glimpse a kind of truth. That violence never truly vanishes. It lingers, like smoke after fire, unseen but inescapable, breathed into your lungs until it becomes part of you. And still, you rise each morning. You saddle your horse, you ride into the dust, you keep your hand near your revolver. Because this is the rhythm of the cowboy's life. Violence may haunt you, may shape you, may hollow you, but it also binds you to survival. To live in the West is to walk forever at the edge of blood, balancing tenderness and brutality, silence and gunfire, hope and despair. It is to know that any moment might fracture into chaos, and to endure anyway. That endurance, that quiet, stubborn endurance, is the only defiance left. If the trail belongs to the men who drive the cattle, The towns, the homes, and the shadows belong to the women who keep the West from collapsing entirely. Yet their names are often missing, their stories left untold, as though the dust itself swallowed their voices before they could be carried into memory. To wake as a cowboy in this world is to ride through a landscape where women are both everywhere and nowhere, their labor woven into every meal served, every garment mended, every bed prepared in towns that glitter faintly against the endless horizon, yet their faces fading from history as quickly as smoke from a dying fire. You notice them first in the silence of domestic labor. A door creaks open on a crooked porch, and there stands a woman with sleeves rolled up, her hands red from wash water that bites like frost even in summer. Behind her, children cry, and the smell of bread that will never be enough to fill bellies drifts out. Her face is tired, the skin drawn tight from wind and sun, but her eyes are sharp, always measuring, always calculating how to stretch too little into enough. You tip your hat. She nods once, and in that small exchange is the unspoken acknowledgement that her survival is harder than yours. You will ride away, but she will stay, bound to the land, to the house that must stand through storms, to the mouths that depend on her even when there is nothing left to give. In the towns, women become something else, labor packaged into performance, survival draped in painted smiles. The saloon doors swing, and there they are, leaning against banisters, laughter sharp as glass, perfume struggling to cover the scent of sweat and whiskey. Men see them as ornament, distraction, possession. But you, watching quietly, know the truth. Each smile is calculated, each gesture a transaction. They, too, are cowboys of a kind, riding their own perilous trail, gambling not with cattle but with their bodies, their dignity, their very lives. Some of them will earn enough to escape, to vanish into a different future. Others will vanish in different ways, their names forgotten before the cards on the table are reshuffled. And then there are the women who carry guns on their hips, who hitch their skirts high enough to ride astride horses, who spit into the dust and curse as fluently as any man. The frontier does not allow all women to remain in the shadows. Some step into the open, not because they seek it, but because survival forces them to. Widows who inherit ranches, daughters who learn to shoot because no one else is left to guard the homestead, wives who ride beside their husbands because the cattle will not drive themselves. These women are spoken of in whispers, sometimes admiration, sometimes mockery, but always with unease, because they blur the boundaries men cling to in order to feel in control. You see them and realize that the West reshapes everyone, bending both men and women into whatever form the land demands. And yet, beneath all these faces, housewives, saloon girls, outlaws, widows, lies the same truth. Women in the West endure a weight heavier than any saddle. Theirs is the labor of constancy. Where men can drift, ride away, vanish into the horizon, women are tethered. They hold the fragile threads of community, of family, of stability, in hands that never rest. They bury children lost to fever. They nurse men broken by accidents or violence. They plant and reap, even when the soil gives little back. And for this, they receive no glory, no legend. Their endurance is too ordinary, too constant, to be remembered in songs. But without them, the West would have crumbled into dust long before men could claim it as their own. As a cowboy passing through, you witness fragments of their struggle, but never the whole. You ride into town and see the woman who serves you stew, her face expressionless as she fills your bowl. But you do not see the hours she spent over the fire, the burns on her hands, the exhaustion in her bones. You pay a coin for a bed in a boarding house, and you notice only the blanket, not the endless washing, the mending, the scrubbing that keep it ready for the next traveler. Women's labor is invisible by design, hidden behind the needs of men, but it is the foundation upon which the entire fragile structure of the West rests. There is also the matter of violence, different from the gunfights of men, but no less real. Women face it in ways that do not make it into stories told around fires. A drunken hand grabbing too roughly, a husband's temper flaring when the fields fail, a stranger's threat whispered in a dark alley. Their bodies become battlegrounds, claimed, scarred, silenced, and still, they endure, because endurance is the only option. Some resist openly, guns in hand, voices raised, but most resist in quieter ways, through resilience, through small acts of defiance that keep them alive another day. A meal stretched farther than it should, a secret stash of coins, a lie told to protect a child. These are not the stories of legends, but they are the stories of survival. Tenderness, when it appears, is sharper because it is so rare. A woman brushing dust from her child's cheek, her hand gentle despite the hardness carved into her life. A saloon girl laughing not for coins but for herself, forgetting for a moment the performance she wears. A widow planting flowers beside her cabin, a fragile rebellion against the brutality of the land. These moments shimmer like water on the horizon, fleeting but undeniable, reminders that even in the harshest world, beauty persists. And perhaps, watching them, you feel something you rarely feel on the trail: hope. Not hope of riches, not hope of comfort, but hope that humanity can survive even here, even in dust and violence. You realize, slowly, that women in the West are not background figures in the story of men. They are the story, the hidden spine that holds everything upright. Without their labor, men would starve. Without their endurance, towns would collapse. Without their resilience, the dream of the frontier would rot. But history will forget them, as it always does, smoothing their names into silence, painting the West as a land of cowboys and outlaws, sheriffs and gunfights, while the women fade into shadow. And yet, you know better, because you have seen them. You have eaten their food, slept in their beds, ridden past their porches, glimpsed their laughter, their exhaustion, their quiet defiance. You know that the true strength of the West is not in the men who fought for it, but in the women who endured it. And as you ride away once more, the herd pressing forward, the horizon stretching endless and indifferent, you carry their images with you. The woman at the washboard, the saloon girl with painted lips and tired eyes, the widow with her rifle, the mother brushing dust from her child's face. You carry them because you cannot forget them, because without them, the West is not the West at all. They are the unseen heartbeat beneath the dust, the quiet song beneath the gunfire, the fragile, stubborn flame that refuses to go out. And in the long silence of the trail, when the stars burn cold above you, you realize that their endurance is the closest thing the West has to salvation. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of belonging, the hollow echo that grows louder even when voices surround you. On the trail, in the saloons, around the fire, the cowboy is never truly alone, and yet solitude clings to him like a second skin, heavier than his saddle, more constant than the dust in his lungs. It is in the way silence expands after laughter fades, in the way a glance at another man's face reveals nothing but the same exhaustion you carry. It is in the stars, vast and pitiless, staring down at you each night as though to remind you of your smallness. Loneliness here is not fleeting. It is the air itself, invisible yet inescapable, pressed into every breath you take. At first, you fight it with thoughts of home, if you ever had one. You summon the image of a mother's hand, a father's voice, a field that smelled of cut grass and not cattle dust. You hear the phantom sounds of church bells, of neighbors greeting each other by name, of footsteps on cobblestones where the air was thick with baking bread instead of smoke. These memories are sharp, bright, like lanterns lit against the darkness. But the trail is patient, and patience is stronger than memory. Each day stretches you thinner. Each mile erodes the edges of those lanterns, until the images flicker and fade. The hand becomes a blur, the voice dissolves, the field shrinks into nothing. And when you try to summon them again, you find yourself wondering if they were ever real, or if you invented them to keep yourself from unraveling. Dreams take their place. At night, beneath the unblinking stars, you slip into illusions that feel sharper than reality. You dream of feasts that would fill your hollow belly, of women whose laughter is soft and uncalculated, of houses where fires burn warmly behind sturdy walls. You dream of freedom, though you do not quite know what freedom means anymore. Sometimes the dream is cruel. You ride into a town where everyone knows your name, where doors open, where smiles greet you, only to wake with the taste of dust in your mouth and the ache of your body reminding you that you are nothing but a shadow on the trail. And sometimes the dream is kind, wrapping you in warmth that lingers even after your eyes open, leaving you with a moment's sweetness before the day devours it. But either way, The dream is always stronger than memory, and soon you begin to prefer it, to live in it, to crave the night not for rest but for escape. The danger, of course, is that the line between dream and waking begins to blur. You ride through the dust and swear you see faces in the horizon, voices calling in the wind. You mistake the shape of a distant tree for the silhouette of a friend, long dead or long gone. You begin to talk to yourself, softly at first, then louder, as though by filling the silence with your own voice you can keep the loneliness at bay. The horse beneath you flicks its ears, acknowledging your mutters, and you pretend for a while that he answers. The men around you do the same, though none admit it. Each of you rides inside your own crumbling mind, illusions whispering to you like companions, hallucinations weaving themselves into the edges of reality until you cannot be sure what is true. There is a particular cruelty to silence when it stretches too far. It does not merely leave you alone, it turns inward, sharpening your thoughts into weapons against yourself. Every regret rises, every mistake returns. Faces you tried to forget reappear, accusing, mocking, pleading. Loneliness is not empty, it is crowded with ghosts, and in the long stretches between towns, with nothing but cattle and dust for company, these ghosts grow louder than the living. You hear their voices in the creak of leather, in the groan of windmill blades, in the shuffle of hooves. They speak until you forget they are not real, until you answer them, until you feel yourself splitting into two, the body still riding, the spirit wandering into shadows that have no end. Some men break under this weight. You see it in their eyes, glassy and distant, as though they are already elsewhere. They ride in silence, eat without taste, stare into the fire without blinking. One night, they may wander from camp, disappearing into the prairie as though called by something unseen. Sometimes their bodies are found days later, collapsed under the sun, lips cracked, revolver still at their side. Sometimes they are never found at all. And though the others mutter that he was weak, that the trail was too much for him, you know the truth. Loneliness is not weakness. It is a tide, and once it rises too high, no man can withstand it. And yet, even in its cruelty, loneliness reshapes you. It strips away the noise, the distractions, the lies you once told yourself. It leaves you raw, facing the bare truth of who you are when no one is watching, when no one cares. Some discover strength in that truth, a stubborn core that refuses to vanish. Others discover only emptiness. You do not yet know which you will find. Each day is a test, each mile a question. Will you endure, or will you dissolve into the silence? The West does not answer. It only waits, patient as always, watching to see who survives and who is swallowed. And yet, strangely, loneliness can also soften. In the rare moments when another man's voice breaks the silence, when laughter echoes faintly in the dark, it cuts deeper precisely because of the emptiness that surrounds it. A joke told at the fire, a song hummed under breath, a glance that acknowledges your existence. These fragments feel enormous, precious, sacred. Loneliness teaches you the value of presence, how fragile and fleeting it is, how it must be cherished even when it cannot be trusted. Without loneliness, perhaps you would not notice these moments at all. With it, they become the only things worth noticing. So you endure. You ride with ghosts, with dreams, with silence pressing against your ribs. You carry illusions like companions. Let them whisper to you when the horizon stretches too wide. You learn to live with loneliness, not as a wound to be healed, but as a condition of existence. As natural as the dust that coats your skin or the stars that glare down without pity. And though it hollows you, though it threatens to unravel your spirit, it also binds you to the truth of the cowboy's life. That survival here is not only a matter of food or coin or bullets, but of spirit, but of the ability to walk alongside silence without letting it devour you whole. And as you lie down once more beneath the cold stars, your blanket thin against the chill, you realize that loneliness will never leave you. It will follow you as faithfully as your horse, as relentlessly as your shadow, until the day the trail itself ends. But perhaps, in its own way, it is not enemy, but companion. Perhaps it is the only witness you will ever have, the only presence that will walk with you from first dawn to last dusk. And in that thought, as bitter as it is, you find a strange comfort. You close your eyes, and the silence folds around you, heavy and endless, and you let yourself drift, not fighting, not fearing, but simply floating in the loneliness that is now indistinguishable from life itself. There comes a time when the trail no longer stretches ahead like an endless promise, but folds back upon itself. When each sunrise no longer whispers of possibility, but of reckoning. You feel it first not in your mind, but in your bones. Those stubborn hinges that once bent without complaint now grinding like old leather, left too long in the rain. The morning cold settles deeper. The ache lingers longer. The saddle feels heavier. A younger man might think the herd has grown restless, that the cattle drag their hooves more than before. But you know the truth. It is you who drags. You who moves slower. You who has become the lagging shadow at the edge of the drive. The West does not announce age with celebration. It simply sharpens its teeth and waits until you realize you no longer keep pace. The body falters first, but the spirit is not far behind. Where once you rode into towns with a flicker of curiosity, you now drift through them like a ghost, seeing not promise but futility. The saloons, the gamblers, the painted women, they no longer shimmer with the illusion of escape. You know their songs by heart, their laughter by script, their promises by the hollow ring of coins that vanish too quickly. You sit at the edge of it all, nursing whiskey that tastes more like regret than relief. And you see younger cowboys swagger through the doors with eyes wide, unaware that they are walking the same circle you have already traced too many times. You want to tell them, to warn them, but your voice stays quiet. In the West, every man must ride his own circle until it swallows him whole. And yet, even as the years strip away illusions, they leave behind a clarity that cuts sharper than any knife. You see how little remains when the noise is gone. Dust, hunger, silence, the faint shimmer of humanity that flickers in rare gestures of kindness. You see how every coin earned is spent too quickly, how every bond forged is at risk of betrayal, how every act of violence lingers longer than the moment it was done. You see, above all, how death walks beside you, not as an intruder but as an old companion. It is there in the faces of men who vanish into the prairie, in the coughs that grow deeper until they silence themselves, in the graves dug shallow because the ground is too hard. Death does not stalk you here. It simply waits, patient as the land, knowing you will arrive in your own time. Some cowboys rage against it, gripping their revolvers tighter, drinking harder, riding faster, as though speed could outpace inevitability. Others fold into it quietly, their laughter fading, their eyes turning inward, their presence shrinking until they are more memory than man long before they vanish. You find yourself caught between the two, torn between defiance and surrender, between the stubborn urge to keep riding and the quiet knowledge that each ride costs more than it gives. You rise each morning, you saddle the horse, you ride into dust and silence, and you ask yourself whether endurance itself has become a kind of slow death. But there are moments fleeting, fragile, that remind you why you have not yet surrendered. A sunrise that floods the horizon with fire, so vast and merciless that for a breath you feel yourself dissolved into it. A night when a fellow rider hums a tune, soft and cracked, and the sound carries you back to something like tenderness. A child's laughter echoing from the porch of a town you pass, startling you with its purity, unscarred by the world you know too well. These fragments do not erase the weight of years, but they pierce through it, reminding you that even in the twilight, beauty persists. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps survival was never about triumph or legacy, but about lingering long enough to witness those fragments before the dark closes in. You begin to wonder what will remain of you when you are gone. Will another man remember your name, speak of the drives you made, the nights you kept watch while others slept? Or will you dissolve into the silence, your life no more remarkable than the dust swept away by the wind? History remembers sheriffs, outlaws, legends polished by storytellers, but it does not remember the cowboys who simply endured. And so you imagine your own ending, a body lowered into shallow earth, perhaps a boot left behind, perhaps nothing at all. It should frighten you, but instead it feels inevitable, almost fitting. You were never meant for legend, you were meant for dust. And yet, even in this twilight, you cling to the saddle, because letting go feels like betrayal of everything you have carried. You ride not because you believe in a future, but because the trail itself demands it. Because endurance has become your only truth. To stop would be to admit that all the years, all the hunger, all the violence and loneliness and silence were for nothing. So you ride on, slower now, but still moving, each hoofbeat an act of defiance against the dark. At night, when the fire burns low and the stars glare coldly above, you feel the weight of your life pressing close. You remember the faces you have known, friends, enemies, strangers, all swallowed by the same silence that waits for you. You remember the women whose laughter lingered, the men whose voices carried across the dust, the moments of kindness that glimmered like sparks. You remember, too, the betrayals, the violence, the losses, but they seem softer now, blurred at the edges. In the end, it is not the pain that endures, but the endurance itself, the stubborn persistence of breath, of steps, of rides, of survival in a land that gave you nothing and demanded everything. And perhaps, in this final stretch, you begin to see the West for what it truly is, not a land of opportunity, not a canvas for legends, but a mirror held up to the human spirit. It strips you bare, it hollows you, it tests you, and in that testing, it reveals who you truly are. You are not the stories told in saloons or written in dime novels. You are not a hero, not a villain, not even a name that will endure. You are dust, breath, endurance, silence. You are a cowboy, and that is enough. So you lie down once more beneath the stars, the fire dwindling, the night air cold against your skin. You close your eyes, and for the first time, you do not dream of escape or of home. You dream only of rest, of release, of the silence folding around you like a blanket. And in that dream, there is no fear, only the endless horizon, the steady rhythm of hooves fading into nothing, the quiet embrace of the land that has claimed you all along. And so, my friend, the trail begins to dim, the dust settling, the hooves slowing, the fire burning low. You have walked through the hunger, the storms, the betrayals, the silences, the fleeting tenderness, the violence, the faces of women who endured in shadow, the long hollow of loneliness, and the twilight where mortality pressed close. You have seen the West not as a painted legend, but as a relentless truth, a mirror that strips away illusion until only endurance remains. And now, as the night folds over us one last time, it is not the cattle we follow, nor the horizon we chase, but the quiet reckoning that comes at the end of every journey. Imagine yourself lying once more beneath the vast sky, the stars sharp and indifferent, their light both ancient and fleeting. The fire has burned to embers, its glow pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The men around you are shadows, their breath steady, their bodies slack with exhaustion. The herd shifts in the distance, lowing softly, the sound like waves rolling against a faraway shore. You lie still, wrapped in a blanket that holds little warmth, and you feel the weight of every mile behind you. Your body is a ledger, every ache an entry, every scar a mark of payment to the land. Your spirit is weary, yes, but also strangely calm, as though it has at last accepted what it always knew, that the West is not something to be conquered, but something to be carried, and then to be surrendered to. You think of the mornings when cold bit through your skin, when coffee boiled black was the only comfort, when the saddle felt like both a burden and a prison. You think of the storms that lashed across the prairie, of the lightning that split the sky like judgment, of the stampedes that thundered with a force greater than any man. You think of the towns, crooked and weary, where coins clinked too quickly into other men's pockets, where laughter hid desperation, where betrayal lingered behind every smile. You think of the women who endured more quietly than you, whose labor, whose pain, whose fleeting tenderness held the fragile world upright. You think of the violence that haunted every corner, not as spectacle but as constant shadow, a language spoken in silence, in suspicion, in the sudden weight of a hand on a revolver. You think of the loneliness that hollowed you, filled you with ghosts, blurred the line between dream and waking until you no longer knew where you ended, and the silence began. You think of the twilight, of the years pressing down, of the clarity that came when illusions fell away, leaving only endurance, only the slow acceptance that dust is what we are, dust is what we return to. And in all this, you see the West as it truly was, not golden, not glorious, but alive, brutal, indifferent, and achingly human. But as you lie beneath those stars, another thought settles over you, softer than the dust, gentler than the fire's dying glow. For all its cruelty, the West was also a place of survival, and survival itself is meaning. To endure hunger, pain, betrayal, silence, and yet still rise each morning, still saddle the horse, still ride into another day, that is its own kind of triumph. Not the triumph of stories, not the triumph of legends, but the quiet triumph of existence. You may not be remembered in books, your name may not echo in saloons, but your breath, your endurance, your survival, in the face of indifference, this, too, is worthy. The West teaches you that glory is fleeting, but endurance is eternal. And now, here, at the closing of the trail, you allow yourself to imagine rest, not as surrender, but as completion. You imagine laying down the saddle, loosening the cinch, letting the horse wander free. You imagine unbuckling the revolver, setting it aside, not in fear, but in peace. You imagine a fire that does not need to be tended, a night that does not demand a watch, a sky that does not glare with cold indifference but wraps you in quiet. You imagine at last a horizon not to be chased but to be entered, slowly, gently, as though stepping into water. Perhaps that is what death is. Here in the West, not an ending, not a tragedy, but a final ride into silence, emerging with the dust that has always surrounded you. The land has been both enemy and companion, and now it will take you wholly, folding you into itself as it has folded so many others. There is no fear in this thought, only calm, only the soft acknowledgement that the trail could never be endless, that every hoofbeat was always carrying you here, to this moment, to this rest. And as you let that thought settle, you realize that this story, the story of waking as a cowboy, of enduring, of fading into dust, was never only about the West. It is about life itself, the relentless rhythm of survival, the fragile flickers of tenderness, the inevitability of loss, the beauty that persists even in cruelty. The West was only the stage. The play has always been the human heart, stubborn, fragile, enduring. And in hearing this story, perhaps you see your own life reflected in its dust, your struggles, your betrayals, your hunger, your fleeting joys, your loneliness, your endurance. Perhaps you too are a cowboy in your own way, riding through a world that does not promise kindness but demands survival, carrying both scars and tenderness, seeking both meaning and rest. So, my friend, let the trail close here. Let the dust settle. Let the fire burn low. You have endured enough, carried enough, dreamed enough. The horizon waits, but not with demand, with welcome. Allow yourself to drift toward it, not with fear but with calm, knowing that endurance itself was always enough. The stars above will keep their watch. The earth below will hold you. The silence will not devour but cradle. And in that cradle, you may rest. If you have walked with me through this long night, through the dust and hunger and silence of the West, then know this: you are not alone. Others have ridden before you. Others will ride after you. And in the rhythm of their endurance, you are bound to them. Our stories may vanish, our names may fade, but our breaths, our struggles, our quiet survival, they echo still, even if only in whispers. And perhaps that is enough. So close your eyes, my friend. Let the fire's last glow warm you. Let the stars blur into dream. Let the dust settle. Let the silence soften. Let the trail fade. Tomorrow will come, but tonight you do not need to ride. Tonight you may rest. Sleep, gentle and deep, as though the West itself has at last released you from its endless demand. Sleep, knowing you have endured. Sleep, knowing you are carried by the same dust, the same stars, the same silence that has cradled every cowboy before you. Sleep now, my friend, and dream not of hunger or violence or betrayal, but of peace, of horizons where no trail waits, of fields where no cattle stir, of skies that shine not with indifference, but with rest. Sleep, and know that I will be here when you wake, with another story, another trail, another night to carry you gently into silence. Sleep well. Good night.